Who is the total stranger you will never forget and why? Broke up with the love of my life on the patio of a cafe. It was my first true relationship and the first time I was the one to end things with someone. One of those things where you're super in love, but there were things that just were not fixable, and love was not enough to salvage the relationship. After he left, he kind of stormed off. I broke down. Like I just burst into tears. It's almost like I'd forgotten that I was in public, on a patio of a cafe. So there I am, lost in the storm of my own emotions, when, from the corner of my eye, I see a lady standing before me, with a yellow rose in hand. My whole face was soaked in tears and snot, and there she was. She was so gentle and kind and sweet and said something like, "I'm sorry. I hope things start looking up for you soon. I got you this rose from across the street. Wanted to brighten up your day." She sat with me for a while and we chatted and I opened up a bit about what happened, and she said that, from the sounds of it, I did the right thing. Pleading face, and that she was proud of me. I will simply never forget her kindness and compassion. I remember being so incredibly speechless. That was about 2.5 years ago. Thank you, Vanessa. Back when I worked retail I got Bell's palsy. It's a reaction to a viral infection that freezes half your face. Just imagine not being able to taste, close your eye, feel temperature or anything at all on only one side of your face. It can last weeks and even several months depending. There is no cure but to slowly wait for it all go back to normal. So suffice to say, I couldn't take the undetermined time off of work to wait it out. One eye wouldn't close. I always looked like I was half surprised because my eyebrow refused to move and I had a bad lisp because half my tongue felt like it didn't exist. This was all accompanied by a mind-numbing headache for weeks. Not to mention the stares while out in public. I was sitting at the register about a month in and a man walked up with a beanie on, and after the transaction I asked him if he wanted a bag for his items. But with the lisp it was nearly impossible to say it right. It was a rough day, in pain and couldn't stand another person giving me that look that I started to tear up. But instead of pity the look he gave me was one of understanding. He pulled off his beanie and explained that he had alopecia which caused all of his hair to fall out. He sat and talked with me for a bit, told me that I was incredibly brave because he knew what it felt like when people stared. He shook my hand, walked out the door and I never saw him again. But I'll never forget him. I hope he's doing well. When I was in Japan with my sister traveling as tourists, we went to a post office in the north of the country. We couldn't speak Japanese, but the manager of the branch spoke a little English and was really excited to practice. He helped us, asked us about our lives, and just in general was a really nice guy. He then asked us if we wanted to get dinner with him. We said yes on the spot but were a little concerned later. Maybe he was a serial killer, lol. We decided we'd show up and if it was just him, we wouldn't go. When we got there, he had his whole team with him. We had an incredible time, ate and drank a lot, and the guy paid for everything. More than 10 years later, my mom and dad went to Japan and went to the exact same post office. The manager was still there. When my parents asked him about us, he remembered everything. He then took my parents for dinner and they updated him on how we were after those 10 years. I hope when I go back there, maybe in the next few years, I'll be able to meet with him once again. A few nights a week my wife serves at a restaurant after working her regular 9-to-5 job, so there are a few nights a week that I get to spend with our 4-year-old daughter. I often don't feel like cooking so her and I go out to eat for a quick bite. One night my daughter and I were sitting across from an old man who was sitting alone. I noticed him a few times listening to us talk and I caught him smiling a few times at our conversations. He got up to leave and he stopped at our table and said, "Hello there. I've been watching you too and I just felt like I needed to tell you something. Cherish these moments because they are long gone way too fast. I've lost just about everyone in my life, my wife and daughter included, and for now I live to see moments like this. Your daughter is beautiful and just please cherish every second." This man walked away and I instantly started crying because I already knew how fast time was going and I always tell myself to cherish these little moments with my daughter. I'll never forget that old man, heart folded hands, medium light skin tone. Guy on the train home looked like something someone had chewed and spit out. Smelled of the beers he was carrying. Asks if he can sit with me. Yeah, that's fine. I'm guessing he's 20 years older than my 20-year-old self, though life might have added some additional years. We talk about music, rock mostly. Our destination is the same. Nearing our end station, he explains that he'd had trouble with alcohol, but stayed off the wagon for 2 years. Then some shit went down with his ex that day, hence the fallback intro drinking. Asks if I want to go home with him. He doesn't want to be alone. I'm a man myself and at that time, a martial arts champion, so not afraid of anything. Nor would I have been even if I wasn't trained. So he happens to live halfway from the train station and my place. I help drink the last of his beers while explicitly avoiding being condescending or offering advice. As he says, he just doesn't want to be alone. Doesn't mean he wants a lecture from a young dude. Well, he kind of ends up getting one anyway, because he has a guitar, and we take turns playing, and at some point he gets interested in how I can calculate chord progressions so fast. So I give a brief lecture on the circle of fifths. Around 5 in the morning I head home. He promises to stay sober. Fast forward 4 years at the local outdoor swimming pool. A guy walks up to me and begins chatting as if I know him. I'm with a girl, and he explains to her how he knows me because I spent a night at his place hindering him in falling back into alcoholism. I recognize him only because of that. He looks so different. So that's one of the very best moments in my life, knowing that I did make a difference for someone where I can honestly say it wasn't because I was expecting something in return. I'll never forget those events or the stranger. And yes, I had moments where I considered making excuses and let him go his way, but I'm not raised that way and maybe I needed someone to talk to that night too. I can also honestly say that I actually didn't think my presence mattered at all. When I went home that morning from his place, I was actually fairly sure he'd walk straight down to the gas station and buy more beer. Turns out he didn't. B took the hard road and straightened himself out, picking up where he left off, being off the wagon. Edit. Bears edited to beers. He wasn't carrying any bears. I went on holiday in Japan with 2 of my best buddies in 2018. On the Kyoto leg of the trip, we were in Arashiyama, the place with the bamboo forest, and wanted to get a photo of the 3 of us together. Most of the people there looked self-absorbed with their selfies and didn't seem to want to help, and those who did help were horrible at taking photos with my friend's DSLR. We really appreciated the help though. Out of the blue, this Caucasian man in his 50s who looked like Sean Penn offered to help take a photo of us. He had a weathered face, dirty brown hair, and was wearing a denim shirt and khaki shorts, with his sunglasses atop his head like a hairband. He wore leather wristbands and had a camera slung across his back. He looked like a professional photographer. He took just one photo of us and returned the camera, asking if it was all right. When we looked at the preview on the camera, it was probably the most beautiful shot we had seen the entire trip. It captured our smiles beautifully and the lighting, focus, etc. were perfect. It looked magazine cover worthy. Kinda like a photo of a pack of meerkats on Nat Geo or something. When we looked up to thank him, he had vanished, even though we were on a straight path and there was no way he could have walked off that quickly. Maybe he got lost in the crowd. Maybe he was spirited away. I used to go to bars and drink a ton by myself. I would meet all kinds of people in those days. Met a girl once who had just gotten out of a relationship. I think I was probably the only guy in there she talked to that night who actually listened to her. I wasn't really interested in a relationship or hookup because I had gone through a breakup too. We sat, talked about our lives. Her story was sad, but she was optimistic. It was just a really mature and platonic conversation that I think both of us were looking for. She gave me a ride home that night so I didn't need to Uber home. She was very kind. I hope she's doing okay. First time in San Francisco and riding a cable car. There are all these warnings printed about keeping your arms and legs inside the car at all times. So, we're going up a hill and there is another cable car coming down the hill on my side. Dot and I make eye contact with a woman on that car. As we passed each other, we both held our hands out and high-fived each other. I woke up late one morning so I was running to school and had 4 college-aged dudes in a doorless Jeep follow me shouting, "Run Forrest, run." As a complete weeb growing up, I decided to take Japanese language classes for 2 years in undergrad. During my last semester of that, while flying home for spring break, I saw a Japanese woman with an infant and a toddler looking absolutely terrified. Knowing Reagan Airport quite well and already being at my destination but still inside security, it seems like the right time to help. Sumimasen. Anata wa dejobu? Excuse me, are you okay? I will never forget the relief wash over her face. The toddler was better at the language than me, but I was passable in conversation enough to get her to calm down and let me escort her to her terminal, where boarding was complete except for her. I explained she had a long layover in LAX, so it shouldn't be as stressful. I was on the London Underground many years ago on a train that was just pulling away. In a fleeting moment I made eye contact with a guy on the platform and he started smiling and running alongside the train comedy style, waving to me until the end of the platform. It still makes me smile thinking about it now, open mouth smile. When I was 17 I went to a friend's 18th birthday party. I was exactly 1 week away from turning 18, so stayed sober for the night. Girlfriend was 18 and had a bit of a drink, so I was just making sure she got home okay. Anyway, got the train home with this guy and his very drunk friend. They'd been in town for the night and started chatting with us. He asked why I wasn't drunk on the last train home and I just explained to him and he was impressed, I guess. Anyway, I went to get off the train and the more sober guy gave me a tenner and said, "Your dad will buy you your first legal drink. I want to get you your second. Enjoy your birthday." Next week. Never forgot it. Was my first experience on the drunk train and still the best. Some guy on bake stopped me and a friend of mine. We were like 15, in the road and talked about how he's Jesus for like 15 minutes. We'll never forget that guy. I met Jesus Christ. I was walking in the downtown part of where I live and some random guy in a fancy suit came up to me and said, "You look like a guy who needs a pair of AirPods Pros," and just took my hand and plopped a pair of $350 AirPods Pros into my palm and then pressed my fingers closed like he's a magician. Then he said, "You'll look back on this moment and go, yo, that shit was whack, yo," and then snapped his fingers, did some finger guns, and then walked away as quickly he came. I took it an Apple store to see if they were real and yup, they're legitimate. They had full serial numbers and the guy. There couldn't see any tampering. So, I got a free pair of $350 earbuds and I still use them to this day. Such a weird story, but the guy was right. I still look back on that moment and go, that shit was whack, yo. I was traveling alone at 23. My first night in Paris, I walked to the Eiffel Tower and sat in the grass to write. Some dude hustling keychains sat down next to me, put his arm around me, and told me, nobody should be alone in Paris, then tried to kiss me. I pushed him away and started to pick up my stuff to leave while he continued to talk about how he would keep me company so I wouldn't be alone. Then a guy walked over and said, "Oh, there you are. I've been looking all over for you." The keychain hustler got up and walked away without another word, and the stranger sat down next to me. He said it looked like I could use some help. We talked about how it almost felt like Christmas in August watching the lights of the Eiffel Tower flicker. He was from New Zealand, in Paris on a wine tour. I knew him for all of 10 minutes, but he may very well have saved my life that night. A homeless woman I saw every now and then on my way to the grocery store. She asked for money once and I said I'm sorry, but I'm too broke to give her some. She memorized and never asked me again, but we greeted each other friendly every time we met for several years. One day I met her. She hugged me out of nowhere and told me she found a proper job and got an apartment and she's spending the day in front of the grocery store to let the people know she knows from seeing for so long so they won't be worried. This was one of the most joyful moments in my life and I sometimes think about her when I'm in that area. I used to live there a few years after that and I never saw her again. A dude held a door open for me at Wawa like 15 years ago and I said, "Thanks man," which he replied, "Ha ha, it'll be July before you know." Think about him almost every day. When I was 9, my mom took my 4-year-old sister and me to the mall. At one point, my mom was stuck in a long checkout line, so my sister and I wandered out the door to sit on the bench on the promenade outside. It was the 80s. We were on the 3rd floor of the mall. As 9-year-old kids tend to do, I soon got distracted and walked over to look at something in a neighboring shop window. A few moments later, I heard a very loud man's voice shout, "Little girl, I don't think you should be climbing on th." I turned around just in time to watch my sister slip and catapult herself over the railing. She'd been climbing on the planter next to the bench. We were 3 stories up. That fall should have killed her. But that guy, that total stranger, had seen her climbing and started walking over to pull her down. A random person saw a child doing something dangerous and decided to step in. When she started to fall, that stranger moved faster than fucking lightning, closed the gap, and caught her around the waist just as she cleared the wrong side of that handrail. He hit the rail so hard the entire thing rang like a church bell. My mom, who had watched the entire scene in horror from inside the store, came flying out the door at that point and scooped her out of his arms. The guy just smiled and said, "You've got a real climber there. I'd keep her away from high places." And then he turned and walked away. Went back to whatever he was doing before. That guy saved my sister's life, and we never even got his name. I had a bad day. Missed 2 buses. I was furious when I came to my stop, knowing that I had to wait for another 2 hours. An old man was sitting there, enjoying some chocolate, and Kami told me, "Anger mostly means you have a lot of sorrow." With that one sentence he made me realize how irrelevant my anger was. I calmed down quickly. "Thanks, old man." A lovely Japanese man who took me all the way to my correct station when I got horribly lost in my first month of living in Japan. I had horribly broken Japanese and he was so patient and kind. Especially as I cried, and that is not really a done thing. I'm not a pretty crier either. A guy in Costco looking at Wagyu beef steaks and his wife says, "Well, we can just throw them in the oven." The look on his face will be with me forever. The random guy at the bus stop when I was about 14 who came up to me and said, "Don't ever try heroin, you'll love it." And I never did. 24 years old me moving out of Paris to Berlin with 2 huge bags, 50 kilograms, and a cat. My best friend, at the time, who was supposed to help me carry all that to the train, at 6 a.m., completely bailed on me. He went partying all night. So that's me, trying to get a cab, hopeless, completely alone in the street. Not a soul is awake but me, standing there, with my bags and my cat, thinking that I will miss my train for sure. I started crying of frustration. Tickets were non-refundable. Then, an angel in the shape of an Eastern European middle-aged man appeared in front of me, out of nowhere. He was on his way to work. He didn't speak French very well but offered to carry my bags all the way to the train station, and even inside the train. He literally saved my day. I had only a few minutes to thank him, and 9 later I started a new life in Berlin. I will never forget him. The guy outside the pub. Coming back from my grandmother's one time, my mom and I in the car, we were looking for a rubbish bin for me to throw a bag of food wrappers away. We eventually found one on a village green, in a village we passed through, but for some reason, by the time we found it we were both laughing hysterically. From this guy's perspective, a perfectly quiet moment smoking a cigarette outside the pub was interrupted by a small hatchback arriving, one woman getting out and leaving the door open, walking up to the bin and violently wrestling a plastic bag into it for a couple of minutes, all the while she and another woman in the car were laughing uncontrollably, before getting back in the car and it screeching off into the night. Every now and then I wonder about that guy who saw and heard the whole spectacle, and I wonder if he remembers it too. Never met them in real life but on the phone. I had just moved to NYC, and upon landing, my apartment situation completely fell through and I found myself homeless. I couch surfed with some friends for a few weeks while trying to find a more permanent situation. I found a place on Craigslist and gave the number a call. Very effeminate male voice answered but said they didn't have an apartment and had no idea how their number got attached to it. At that point I started crying. I apologized to them and was about to hang up, but they asked me to vent to them, and so I did. About everything. Being homeless, not finding an apartment, worried about having to move back home, worried about being on my own after college. This person listened to me and validated all my feelings, then gave me the best pep talk afterwards. Then they said they had to get ready for a drag show but that they were rooting for me. Never spoke to them again, but I will always remember that stranger who provided some light on a dark day. I was 16 and had flown across the country to visit family and friends for the summer. We had just moved away from those parts, and it was a tough adjustment for me. I stayed with my uncle. He was very much like family, but not biological. Anyway, he had moved in this crazy lady and was going to marry her. She was an absolute nightmare. So much so, that my uncle's sister offered to have me stay with her. Well, for me, that was right out of the frying pan and into the fire. She was unstable at best, and I was a rebellious teen. I overheard her one day complaining on the phone about me staying there, that she wasn't being paid for it, etc. I think it had been about a week at the time. Anyway, she lost her shit on me one afternoon following that phone call. Mind you, she lived in BFE, Kansas, and told me to GTFO of her house. So, I packed my 2 suitcases and left. I had $100 in my pocket, 2 suitcases and a plane ticket for a week later in the next state over. I began marching down the road and trying to formulate a plan. Cell phones weren't a tool that everyone had at the time. Her house was on a lonely dirt road about 5 to 8 miles from a small town of about 1,500 people or so. A truck pulled up beside me, and a weathered cowboy rolled down the window and said, "Miss, you look like you can use a ride." I looked at him, the truck, the road, and that house I was staying at in the distance. I rolled the dice, threw my stuff into the back of his truck knowing that could be the end to my short time on Earth. He told me he was going to take me back to his house. He had a wife and kids there and that I was welcome to stay as long as I needed. I was skeptical, but hopeful. Sure enough, we made a couple turns and pulled into this beautiful farmhouse, with plenty of children's toys outside. I was greeted by his sweet wife and children. I asked to use their phone to make a long-distance call back to my 4 years ago. A cold October as I rode home on my bike, my lungs felt like they were about to freeze up due to the rapid breaths of cold air. I was maybe a mile away from home when I collapsed. It was quite late too. There weren't any cars in sight and I was about to pass out. I don't know if it was seconds or minutes later, but another biker, a guy maybe in his 30s, saw me and rushed over. He called paramedics and I was rushed to the hospital. I was put on a breather and covered with a heated blanket. The biker is the one who called my family members and my dad was the first one to show up. I made a recovery a few hours later and I paid that biker a literal $1,000, which was probably near my whole account balance back then, but it was worth it. If it wasn't for that biker, I don't know what would have happened. His name is Jacob and we are great friends now. The old dude playing a saxophone while skiing down the mountain. That dude was doing black diamonds, moguls, and other crazy stuff while wailing on his sax. I only saw him that one time. Guy in a witch's costume drawing hearts on the sidewalk with strawberries, that I saw on my way to work. That night he got on the streetcar, different clothes, mostly, and sat down beside me to chat. His name is Kevin and he told me all about his theory that keeping in farts causes you stress and cancer, which is why he does crack, for the stress you know. Called me a nice person and told me not to let the man get me down. The next year he ran for mayor and got over 800 votes, putting him in 8th place out of 13. Which means 5 candidates, mostly lawyers and civil servants, got fewer votes than the crack fart witch. I just got this cheap generic shirt from Walmart with a quote on it. I don't remember what it was. I went inside a gas station with it on and this guy came out of the alley and stared at me. He then started taking his shirt off and laughing. I was confused and scared. He was shorter than me but he looked like he had crack head strength. He then pointed to a massive tattoo of the exact thing in my shirt. He then said, "Woot woot," patted me on the back and walked out the door. Pro cake decorator here. I was asked to make a welcome baby cake. They then immediately asked what the cancellation policy was because they were not sure that the baby was going to make it. I never wanted to make a cake so badly in my life. They picked up the cake. This was years ago. I think about that little girl all the time. I hope she is thriving. Seattle WA native. Most of mine are tweaker I met on the bus coming home from school who just saw me AMD had to tell me something. We get a lot of drug users on buses who want to talk to young kids about totally inane nonsense. They don't mean any harm. One guy lectured me about the economics of farming lettuce. One told me all about how life is hard and gave me life advice. And one guy was on the phone screaming to his buddy about how he just killed someone and then hung up on him and started talking to me about Pokemon because he saw I was playing Heart Gold. People sure are bizarre. I was walking home after picking up some food one evening and I saw a younger guy pushing an old Hispanic woman in a wheelchair. As I got close, he stopped me and asked for help. The old woman had missed her bus and needed help getting home. She also didn't really speak English and neither I or the guy spoke Spanish well. The guy explained that she couldn't get in a normal car in her condition and that he had already pushed her about a mile. He asked me to push her the rest of the way as he was already late for his shift at work. I agreed and pushed the woman for around 90 minutes while she cursed me each time we hit a bump. She was very grateful when we finally arrived at her home. I was hungry and stopped at a bench on my walk back home to eat my food. I was a kid and a gentleman at the next table in a restaurant could speak 6 languages or so. He gave examples of a few. I was so impressed and since then wanted to learn languages. I speak 6 fluently myself now, plus a couple more at a basic level, so it had a real positive impact. I was on my way back to my newfound home in a different country after visiting my abusive family. They left me in the airport with no money, without letting me know that I needed credit cards to pay for my luggage. This woman in front of me said she would pay for mine and not to worry about the costs, essentially saving me from being stuck there. I was about 19 at the time. I still think about her every now and then. Well, I guess I forgot about him in one way. I was in a motorcycle accident where a car swerved head-on at me, and I took a major blow to the head. Thankfully I always wore a helmet, so that took 95% of the blow. But I was still understandably very shook. I barely remember getting hit, and then bam, I was just laying there on the ground almost blacked out, drifting from consciousness to unconsciousness. And this dude in a company van pulled over asking what the fuck was wrong with the car that hit me since he saw it all happen. And the dude ran over to me, helped me up to my legs. I remember falling over once after he picked me up, and drove me to the nearest hospital in his company van. It was only a couple of blocks away, so no need to call an ambulance. I remember crying, and repeatedly saying, "I'm so sorry," for no reason. Something in my brain obviously fried from the fall. And then I noticed my arm was bleeding all over his seat, which made me say sorry even more, and he laughingly said, "It's okay, the company will pay for that." Then we arrived, and he took me to the ER and waited with me for a doctor to come. The doctor checked me up, took the helmet off, which I still wore for the whole trip, which is very important until a doctor can make sure it's fine to take it off, and made sure I wasn't seriously hurt. Meanwhile, the dude that helped me is still sitting in the waiting room for me. I took a couple of x-rays because my arm hurt a lot, but it was just a hairline crack in my bone, so nothing major. But this still took like an hour to get the pictures developed, etc. After that I was free to go, and I saw the dude still sitting there, waiting for me. And not just that, turns out directly after he left me with the doctors, he drove to the accident scene and took photos of everything for insurance purposes, and also called the police. He also propped up my motorbike against a nearby wall to protect it from more damage. And then he went back to the ER, waited for me, and then texted all pictures and information to me. And he also said he'd witness in case the woman that hit me tried to pull something legal against me. And then he drove me home and helped me into my bed. The dude literally took like 3 hours of his own time when he was supposed to be working, and helped me with everything instead. And I never even got his name. Big ramble, I know. I've just never talked about this before. My memory was so hazy from the concussion, but it all came back when a lovely lady at the cemetery saw me visiting my grandmother's grave. As of described, she came over with flowers intended for her husband's grave and shared them with me, placing them near grandmother's headstone. Her kindness and generosity touched me at a moment that was especially meaningful. I'll never forget her. I was 15 and sitting at a cafe with a friend. A much older dude came up and asked if he could read my palm, and I said sure. He just looked at it for a minute and then said, "I've never seen this many lines in my life, you're fucked." Then he left. I'll never stop finding that hilarious. Butterbean. 19 years ago. I was 17. Close to midnight 1 a.m. on New Year's Day. Older. 50s-ish. Black dude from Maryland or somewhere else way up north visiting family in Georgia for New Year's. Decides he's going to walk to the store for more beer while he's shit-faced drunk and gets lost, walking by the side of the road, in an area he doesn't know, with his cell phone dead, in an area with no streetlights. My best friend and I are on my parents' front porch. He's playing guitar and I'm walking a bass line to what he's playing, and Butterbean just comes down the driveway on the hill really carefully. My friend and I are very white, and the porch light is shining on us, so think, light mode at night, looking at us for poor Butterbean. Dude comes down the hill going, "Excuse me? I'm sorry, but I think I'm lost." And we talk to him for a minute, tell him to take a seat because he looked tired, and handed him a water out of the cooler. We can tell he's pretty drunk, but he's a very happy drunk. He asks if he can use the phone, and I go in to grab it. Cordless, landline. Yeah, I'm old, while my friend keeps listening to him talk about his sister's party earlier that day. My dad hears the new voice and comes outside. Dude sees him, goes to stand up. Dad says, "You're good, man, just wanted to introduce myself." You want some black-eyed peas, collard greens, and cornbread? It's still hot. I thought this dude was gonna cry. He teared up, but none fell. He couldn't dial the number, so he told it to me and I punched it in. My dad got a hold of the lady on the other end. She said, "Who is this about?" And the old dude yells, "Tell her it's Butterbean." And everyone laughs, and my dad gave her directions to come get him, because it was a ways away. Stayed on the phone with her. It was her cell phone, until she pulled in the driveway, but it took a while. While my dad talks to Butterbean's sister, my mom brought out a plate for Butterbean, and he's sitting there with such a happy look on his face, in a green plastic Adirondack chair, mouthful of collards and cornbread dipped in the black-eyed peas, ice-cold Dr. Pepper cracked open on the little side table while my friend plays and sings, Gravedigger, on his acoustic, and he swallows a bite and says, "Man, y'all are angels. I can't believe I'm sitting here eating collards and cornbread with such cool white folks. This is amazing. I'd never heard anyone talk like that before. It really stuck with me. Like, how could anyone do anything other than what we'd done?" I didn't get it at the time, but thought about it after. It was a great night. Didn't keep in touch or anything, but every few years my brother and I will be sitting outside at night and one of us will go, "Remember Butterbean? Yeah, that was fun. Hope he's doing okay." 30 years ago, I was 17, with dreams of becoming a music teacher. It was a Saturday morning in my small city, and I was walking a couple blocks from the library to the mall to buy myself lunch. On the way, I ran into a woman who looked like she was in her 30s but also much older, like she lived a tough life. She asked if she could have $1 to buy a cup of coffee. I told her if she walked with me, I'd buy her lunch. Over the course of our walk and lunch, she told me she was a music teacher. Her father was diagnosed with cancer, so she moved in with him to take care of him. She had to take him to so many medical appointments that she couldn't work full-time, so she became a substitute teacher instead. Her income dropped and was inconsistent, and they couldn't afford to pay their phone bill, and therefore she couldn't be called for work. I could tell that she was being honest, based on the mutual music teachers we knew and the details she gave. That was the day that I truly understood that sometimes good people do all the right things but just have shitty circumstances, and I realized the importance of not passing judgment and instead showing compassion. I ended up studying music ed but not becoming a teacher. Instead, Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.